Good morning and welcome to Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Kitchener, Ontario. It's good to have you with us this morning as we dig again into the book of Esther. This will be our final session on Esther as we complete the book today and then go into recess for the summer months with our adult Bible study and, of course, come back in the fall. Now, right off the bat here this morning, I'll just lay out all the cards on the table here for everybody, and that is that for the first time in this whole study, in addition to having just a couple of cantors in the building who are getting ready for the service, we do have a few people in the building this morning as we move towards reopening. And since we can have people in, we decided let's have some people in and they can help with the singing. And if they have questions during Bible class, you may hear some of those. And but that doesn't mean that we're playing favorites or anything like that. It's all just a kind of a bit of a dry run for next week when we get everything up and running a little more at full speed. So welcome to those who are in the building this morning. It is very, very good to see other faces here. Not that we don't like the faces we've seen all the way along, but more is better when it comes to having folks in the church. All right. Again, welcome. And as we have done previously, we'll just make a few announcements of a housekeeping kind of a nature here. First of all, if you're tuning in this morning and you'd like a copy of the lesson sheet, you can just find that at the church website, www.holycrosskitchener.org, and you'll find the link to the lesson notes right under the link to the Bible class itself. And then, as we have done throughout this study, we will take questions as they come in, not just from the few who are here in the building this morning, but if you have a question that you would like to email, there's my email address there, and we will take a few breaks during the class to check for emails and allow people who are here in the building, if they have any questions, to ask those questions as well. So we'll follow the same basic format we've followed through the weeks up to now. I'll teach for a while, then we'll take a break and see if there are any questions, and if there are, we'll deal with them then, and then we'll move forward into the next block of teaching, and then questions as they arise, that sort of thing. All right. And as is our custom here, we always have a few things while you're getting your coffee at home or getting yourself settled here in the building to at least make you scratch your head and wonder about the wisdom of people, particularly this week, the wisdom of people who put up signs. Here's a sign that I found on the internet this week. The emergency phone is not installed. Please do not have an emergency at this location. Don't mind the fire hydrant that's right there to handle the emergency. If you need to call somebody about that, please don't do it here. All right. This isn't a sign, but I found this on the internet, and I think it is somewhat revealing of the world in which we live today, where we like to think we're a cut above those who have come before us. Somebody on the balcony got it really quickly. Yeah, 50 years ago, the owner's manual of a car showed you how to adjust the valves. Today, it warns you not to drink the contents of the battery. Yeah, that is pretty much how it is in the world today. Yeah, well, to be fair, nobody knows how to adjust the valves anymore because it's all computerized. But anyway, all right, this is just, this isn't something we're interested in around here, but I saw this sign and I thought this was pretty funny. It's just come last week at 7 o'clock. And now the next one and the last one is one that probably I will only laugh at, and maybe a few others. But down in the south of the U.S., it's camp meeting time among certain Christians, where they gather together in the tents with the sawdust and have the services that go on and on. Anyway, I saw this sign, and I just cracked up. It's a church announcing their camp meeting beginning tonight going to the 2nd of July, 2 services a day, 10:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m., and then it points to a sign that says dead end. On a theological level, I find something rather funny about that. I just think that's kind of like, well, it may be truer, this may be truer. Anyway, I'm not going to cast judgment on things, but I will. Part of why I saw this as funny is that I noticed the other day that one of my absolute favorite signs in Kitchener has been taken down and replaced with something a little, I guess, more in tune with the times. For the last number of years, whenever I've needed to go to the Walser Funeral Home from here, I usually go up East Avenue, down Krug, under the Parkway, and up Becker Street and into their back parking lot. And I always would have a chuckle as I passed the last street, I think it's Bruce or something like that, that you go through on your way to their parking lot. And on the telephone pole was a sign that said dead end as you were progressing to the funeral home. And I always thought to myself, this is hilarious. This is tremendous. Whoever did this should be elevated to be the commissioner of the city, put in charge of everything. Yes, absolutely. Dead end at the end of the street. It's the funeral home. And as I drove by there the other day, I now see they've taken down the dead end sign, and it just says no through road. Like, oh, come on. Let's have a sense of humor here, people. I had even bumped once, this was back, I think, in the fall last year. I happened to be coming from the funeral home and bumped into Henry Walser, who was walking towards the funeral home. And I said, Henry, did you pay for that sign? And now it's gone. I just come on. We got to have more fun, especially in these times. All right. And we as Christians, of all people, we can laugh at death a little bit. It's sad and tragic, but it's temporary. We know this. All right. Let's get into Esther here. Oh, this is the slide that has all the animations. I've been going to deal with this for 8 weeks now, and I never do. All right. Just a quick reminder again about the website and the email address, and as is the way, we'll also just fill you in a little bit if you happen to miss last week on the story as it has progressed so far. Now, Haman was found out for his evil plot. That's the sort of central story of the book. And he is executed, hung up on the gallows that he had made for Mordecai, and he is dead. But as we said last week at the beginning of the class, that's a little bit like in the crime show where the bad guy has been found out, but the bomb is still ticking and going to go off. And how are we going to defuse the bomb? And the bomb in this case is the edict that the Jews were to be killed. And so the only thing Esther can really do is to go before the king a second time and ask for a new proclamation. But because of the laws of the Medes and the Persians and the way things are done in those days, this doesn't get rid of the first proclamation. It's still in effect, but then a second one comes. And the two kind of stand opposite each other. And so the king agrees. This is the only possible way out of the mess that is scheduled to happen on the 13th of Adar, the first month of the Jewish New Year. And this is, the only way out of the situation. So Esther and Mordecai get to work. They write a new edict. The Jewish people are given the right to protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate anyone who would attack them or their women and children. We won't get into the little bit of translation fun between the NIV and the ESV. They're also given the right to plunder the property of their enemies, and it's all to be in effect as of the day that Haman's edict would have been in effect so that they are able to protect themselves. So the two go out And there's tension over time as to which of these two things is going to happen. Are the Jewish people going to be attacked? And if they are attacked, what will they do to defend themselves? Well, the 13th of Adar rolls around, and to no one's surprise, things turn nasty. Many people, very loyal to Haman, begin to put his edict into order and begin to attack the Jewish people. They, of course, then are empowered to defend themselves. About 500 men in Susa are killed, and about 75,000, the Bible says, are killed in the fighting. The Jews, however, are merciful, it appears, in their self-defense, in that they do not plunder their attackers, and there is no record of them taking the conflict any further than those who actually attacked them. And so it was, it was totally, as far as we can tell, a self-defense maneuver, the right to protect themselves. And then things carry on one more day, and on the 14th of Adar, there's still more hostility in Susa. Haman's 10 sons are hanged. That probably incites more people to rebel, and there's more bloodshed, unfortunately, in the city of Susa. And that's kind of where we left things last week in terms of the story. The plot is laid out, and everything is set to go. All right. Today we move into the final. What's going to happen after this? How are we going to remember this day and the things that have happened to us? And that brings us into Esther chapter 9 and Esther chapter 10. And in this, we're going to be in the latter half of chapter 9. We're actually going to pick it up and at chapter 9, verse 18. And if you have a Bible, that's where we are here this morning. All right. How do you celebrate this? How do you remember this? How is this going to be something that lives on in the mind and in the life of the people? Well, the way these things are often remembered in the Scriptures and in life today, too. We do it around the table. I think one of the hardest things for a lot of people during the last year and a bit of the pandemic has been the inability to have our tables as open as we would like to have them, to have family near, to celebrate the special days. There's something innate about being at the table together. And so, to no one's surprise, Esther and Mordecai decide that that we need a feast, an ongoing feast, a remembrance of what has happened, ultimately what God has done, even though God is not mentioned in the story, but how God has preserved his people. The book of Esther began with a feast, and it ends with a feast. And this is actually a theme that runs through the entire book. And I'm going to show you something on the screen here in just a minute that illustrates it, I think, fairly well. Everything that's important in this book, all the important decisions, all the important activities are decided at the dinner table, at banquets. You can make an outline of the book by tracking the feasts. And here's what I mean. If you remember way back at the beginning of the book, the first recorded event in the book of Esther is that great big feast that went on for 180 days, if you remember that. Way back at the beginning, this giant feast for all the people. And that opened the palace up, and people came and celebrated all the great things that Xerxes had done up to that point in time in his reign. And then there was a second feast, a smaller feast, just for the men of Susa, and that feast went on for 7 days. And it was at that feast, if you remember, that Vashti, the first queen, was asked to come and parade herself before the officials, and she refuses, and it's that feast then that kind of sets the story in motion. What are we going to do with Vashti? She's, of course, deposed and sent away. And Esther comes, and there's a feast that celebrates her rise. And then in the intervening chapters, the plot of the book begins to thicken. As Haman is elevated, Mordecai refuses to bow down. Haman gets angry and decides that the Jews need to be killed. And Esther plucks up her courage, goes before the king, and simply invites him to dinner, to a feast, at which she invites him to a second feast. And this is the real turning point of the book, is at these two feasts where they get together over wine, and it is at the second feast that the real plot is discovered, and things begin to turn around again. And this is how it's often done in Hebrew writing. This shows that whoever the author of Esther was, the person who actually wrote the story down, was very well schooled. It could have been Mordecai, but we kind of don't think so, just because he's too big a participant in the story to probably be the writer of it as well. But he could have been. But it's written in a very Hebrew style. And if you look at a lot of Jesus' stories, a lot of Jesus' parables, or a lot of Jesus' teachings, or even some of the things that Paul writes in the New Testament, you find this same sort of outline, where there's things at the beginning, things at the end, and it's right smack dab in the middle that the real nugget, where the real kind of hinge of the story is. And we see that here. And so the plot unfolds. There's another feast then corresponding to the feast for Esther that celebrates the rise of Mordecai. And then the feast of Purim, which we're going to talk about today, that's initially just celebrated in the city of Susa, but then the edict is sent out to the entire empire. And so you can see a parallel, a feast for everybody at the beginning and a feast for everybody at the end. A smaller feast for the people of Susa just after the beginning and just before the end. A feast celebrating Esther, a feast celebrating Mordecai, and then the two feasts in the middle where the real plot is discovered. It's a very, we read some of these stories and we sometimes struggle to what's the outline of this. It's because we don't read it and we don't outline things in the same fashion they do. But it's a very fascinating kind of way to do this. Okay, that's a little bit of stuff that makes my brain tick. It may not make yours. So we'll move along. All right. So what about this Feast of Purim? The feast is celebrated on the 14th and 15th of Adar, one day after the first battle was on the 13th. So they celebrated the day later on 14, and the day after on 15. And where does that fit? We've kind of thrown around the month of Adar here for a long time, and I've never really said where does that fit in terms of our calendar. That's somewhere in the months of February and March. The Jewish calendar is lunar, and there's various days built in to kind of keep things so we still get years and things like that. But so it always ends up somewhere in February and March in our schedule, in our calendar, Gregorian calendar today. And they're days of feasting and gladness. This is the happiest of the festivals and feasts that come out of the Old Testament. It's a joyous, joyous time. Gifts of food. This is how they did it then. There were gifts of food. And the word and the name comes from the pur the lots that are cast. Let's just read a little bit about it. We'll pick it up at verse 20, and we'll just read from the scriptures the story of the festival. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes, far and near, to have them celebrate annually on the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned to joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and cast the poor, that is, the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, these days are called Purim, from the word pur, of course, which means lot. Because of everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it upon themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them should, without fail, observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, in every province, in every city. And these days of Purim should never cease to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of them die out among their descendants. So there's the biblical, if you will, mandate for this. Great celebration, great feasting, and everything to remember how God saved them. I've just quoted the final verse that I read to you here, and found an interesting Hebrew graphic here that highlights some of the main stories. You can't, even my Hebrew, I can't read all of this, but interestingly, as Hebrew does, it starts on the right and moves to the left and kind of snakes its way down the page. The opening scene of Purim is the things they remember is Esther coming and being allowed to speak when Haman extends to her the golden scepter and she touches it out of a sign of respect. And then the next big event is the parading of Mordecai through the city, led by Haman as he goes forward and is elevated instead of Haman. And I'm not quite sure what this middle picture is, but I assume these are the officials coming to get Haman for the final feast and to take him to the palace for that feast. And we know ultimately what happens to him here. I love the pulleys. I just really do. I think there's this, I guess my northern German ancestry or something that loves these kind of sort of gross and bizarre things, hoist him up on the pulley, up he goes, and he's very placid about the whole thing too, He's just like, okay, I'm being hung today, all right. And then, of course, his 10 sons who are lined up right after him to go up the gallows as well. Like I say, it's a little bit on the gross side in some ways, and but yet it tells the story. This is what happened. All right. We'll take a quick break here, see if we have stirred up any online controversy or question here. So far not. Any questions from you in the building?
The lots weren't like actually throwing dice or anything, was it? It's just a decision that was made?
Well, when Haman did it at the beginning, he threw the lots, threw dice to determine the days. And so there's some people that get a little unnervy, that, the casting of lots, this sort of thing is elevated, and becomes the name of the story, of the festival. That it's the lots that make the name. But I think again, we have to remember from our day and age to what happened back then. Back then, that was a perfectly acceptable way of making decisions. You cast lots. It's how the first Matthias was replaced. In a kind of a far more or how Judas was replaced by Matthias. And I was even reading. I just happened this sometime in the last couple of weeks was on a church web page for one of our sister congregations in the U.S. in the Missouri Synod, and I can't remember what took me to their webpage, but something that was on there that I was interested in reading, and took a few minutes to look. And while I'm there, usually I take a few minutes just to poke around and see what else they have on their website. And I was intrigued to see that their current pastor, as all the rest of their pastors, was called at a meeting where his name was drawn out of a hat. And I went, wow. How does that go over? That would probably not work, But I thought to myself, well, we could have, if we had that system here at Holy Cross, we could have gone on and called an assistant pastor, a year and a bit ago. Just get out the hat, throw in some names, and pull one out and go, he's the guy, and see if he comes, I'm not sure even how I feel about that, but he seemed quite content that this was it, and this was his thing. But anyway. All right. So the feast is established. Now, what are the main themes? I think it's important, beyond just what happened, that we ponder for a few minutes what are the main themes. What are the things they're really celebrating here? And now I have to say right off the bat, I'm not an expert on Jewish feasts, but I did a little bit of reading and a little bit of digging behind the scenes here, and found some really good stuff. The first thing that's really being celebrated in Purim, and the things that we can both of the things that we're going to talk about here are things that we can still grab onto today. For example, God's providence. We don't often talk about God's providence, but God's providence is that work that God is doing behind the scenes in our lives that we might not recognize at the moment, and that we may never completely, fully recognize, but often down the road a little bit, we take a look in the rearview mirror of life, and we look back and we go, oh, isn't that interesting how that all came together to get me where I am now, and how God has worked. Just through the things of life, without ever being obvious, and just work things out for us. And that's really what, I said at the very beginning of the book, one of the challenges of this book is that God is nowhere mentioned. Nobody even so much is recorded as having said a prayer, though I'm certain they did. But God is everywhere behind the scenes. There was in the early stages of the book, we saw the phrase, it just so happened that, it just so happened that, and it was that. These kind of things that kind of point to something, nudge you to think, okay, why did that wasn't random. There was something behind there. And so that providence of God, which is something I think that we can still, as I say, latch on to today. I can think of examples in my own life, many of them, where one thing happened, another thing happened, and another thing happened, and they maybe all seemed a little disjointed, but when you look back in the mirror, you kind of go, oh, a little bit of order there after all that I didn't see. And that wasn't all quite as coincidental and as random as it may be, or have seemed at the moment while we were going through it. And the idea, too, that even though it may appear as if evil is winning, God has the final victory. The Hamans of the world have their wicked plans, but in the end it's God who turns the plan back on their heads again. I love that expression that we read a few moments ago from Esther. And then the other main theme that Purim celebrates is the whole notion of exile and what it means to be in exile and the displacement and the chaos that comes. And I thought to myself, well, this kind of resonates with the world we've been living in, at least in our little corner of it, for the last 14, 15 months now. That experience of disorder, displacement, a certain level of chaos, time when nothing makes sense, when home is far away and the world is not as it should be. Now, we haven't had to go through all of that, but certainly through this time of the pandemic and the lockdown and the being kind of knocked out of our regular routines, I can relate to this. Everything is just sort of out of order. Things aren't like they should be, and Purim celebrates God's being with us in those times, so that even though things may look grim, we can still smile with confidence that God is in control. We can even celebrate in the darkness, for there is a promise that God is bringing the light. In short, Purim is about meeting the pain of exile with a celebration of God's care for us. And Pastor Zabel and I were talking this week, as we begin to reopen again here, and hopefully, prayerfully, this is the last time we have to reopen. We can just stay open. But how it would be wonderful at the end of, when we're finally able to lift the restrictions and take off the masks and gather together as we had up until the beginning of March 2020, how important it would be to have a service that just acknowledges that, hey, we can all be back again, and to celebrate God leading us through this time of exile and strangeness and guiding us through the providential care that has been there all along the way. I got thinking after that and said to myself, yeah, that would be so nice if it could be by Thanksgiving. I don't know whether that'll happen, but, get your shot, I guess. That's all I can say. Even if you don't want it, get it. Anyway, all right, let's these are real experiences of life. The experience of God guiding and caring for us day by day, the things that we confess, in Luther's explanation, for example, of the first article of the Creed, that all the things that God gives us without any merit or worthiness to us, everything from, our life itself, our spouses, our children, right down to the shoes on our feet, well, all out of his fatherly divine mercy, love and care for you and for me. And then, as God does everywhere throughout the Scriptures, whether it's to the Israelites in Egypt, to the people of Judah in Babylon, to the dispersed northern kingdoms, he's always there. And even with Jesus himself, who becomes for a time an exile down in Egypt, where everything's thrown out of order, he's there, yet bringing through his plan and his care. All right. Now, Purim, we'll pass over this fairly quickly here, but Purim is still celebrated today in Jewish communities. Again, I'm not an expert, and one always has to be a little careful about describing the customs and traditions of others. Acknowledge right off the bat you don't really know what you're talking about here. But some of the things that I've been able to glean from the internet and other readings is a little bit of how the celebration still happens today in synagogues and in Jewish homes. It always begins with a reading of the Esther scroll. Now, I'm not sure that that's the whole book of Esther. I kind of don't think so. But a scroll, a story that at least focuses on the main parts of the story. This is sometimes called the spiel. Everybody, they read the spiel, and they go over the whole history of the story. In some cases, it's read by a woman, because Esther is, of course, a woman, and to highlight her significance in the role. And every time, Haman's name is read, and he occurs 54 times if you read the whole book. They get out their noisemakers, and they... this is a twirly one. that you kind of spin it around and it makes noise. They also, any kind of noisemaker will do, as far as I understand. And you blot out his name, so you can't hear it. So anytime they know Haman's coming, they're getting ready to get rid of his name. Sort of, that's kind of fun, I would think, more participatory. Then, of course, there is the big meal and the giving of food and money to the poor. Each family gives 2 gifts of food and makes 2 donations to charity. Then there's the meal, and what is just simply referred to as festive drinking. And one rabbi this is in the 4th century, but he's apparently had some lasting impact on the celebration of Purim, suggested that one should drink until he could no longer distinguish between cursed Haman and blessed Mordecai. And this is a painting, kind of a Norman Rockwell-ish painting of 2 Orthodox Jews who have done just that. You'll note that the wine cabinet is empty, and they can no longer distinguish much of anything. We have no such festival in the Christian church, I just hasten to add. But, there's a part of me that's going, maybe we should. I'm just kidding. Anyway, just drink till you cannot distinguish anymore. Be happy. Part of this is because at the table in Esther's place, drunkenness is a big part of this story. At the 180-day feast at the beginning was a pretty boozy affair. The 7-day feast that he had for all of the men of Susa was a really boozy affair. And then when you get to the feasts that Esther hosts, everything always happens over wine. And you get the sense that, everybody, she was shrewd there too. Let's let the wine flow a little bit. Let's people relax nice before we have to tell them what we have to tell them here. That's very much a part of it all. Okay, another thing, masquerading, remembering, the secret identity that Esther had throughout a good chunk of the story, that she was a Jew. And right there, queen, married to the king, but that her real ancestry was not revealed. And Mordecai in his sackcloth, and then being dressed up in the king's robes and paraded through the city. And then, again, my love for the macabre and bizarre. The hanging of Haman and his sons in effigy. And what some people do, I've seen some pictures of this. Unfortunately, the one that was the best is a copyrighted image, and we couldn't use it for something like this. Actually shows out on the clothesline all these dolls of Haman and his 10 sons out on the clothesline hanging out there. And I thought, well, that's cool. And then, but if that's a little too out there for you, you can get this little cranky wind-up thing where you get to put him. As I say, my love for the pulley. You just crank him up there, and I thought, oh, this would be so much fun to have in your home, and just hang Mordecai up there. These are the things that, as I say, there's this sort of dark side to me. I'm the only one in the family, just to sort of, Northern European, Northern German roots on my mom's side. I'm the only one in the family that makes much note in the days leading up to Christmas of Krampusnacht, the Black Santa who apparently comes around and scares the bad little children to death. When I found out about this, I went, I absorbed this story as my own. I don't know where this comes from, but it speaks to my heart, yes. This is the same guy that wants the dead end sign back up by the funeral home, just so you know. All right, let's go. And if you happen to live in Iran, and Bijan, one of our members who has lived over in that part of the world emailed me very early on, and I've not ever made any comment because I was hoping we would get to this at the end. If you live in Iran, you can actually go and see what are believed to be the tombs of Esther and Mordecai. This is kind of north and east of Baghdad. I can't remember, I didn't write down, I should have, the actual name of the place. But you can actually go in, and there is a memorial there to Esther and Mordecai. Now, at certain times, the Iranians and others who have there's tension over there, there's been threats to destroy it. One hopes and prays that doesn't happen. That's happened to enough ancient monuments already in that part of the world. But you can actually go and see this shrine dedicated to the two of them. And if you can't do any of that, and you're a nerd like me, you can always buy Purim stamps from the Israel post office. These are just a few of them that have come out over the years. One celebrating the boozy feast of Xerxes or Ahasuerus at the beginning of the book. The coronation of Esther. These are very complex drawings, and you might not be able to see it very well, especially if you're here in the building. And then the parading of Mordecai. As I hunted around and looked at some of the stamps they've put out, this was the one that was my personal favorite. Oy. What am I going to do with you all? Anyway, so we won't pause long on that. So, and that brings us basically to the end of the book. The greatness of Mordecai is the focus of a very short chapter 10, which is just 3 verses long, which also introduces kind of the only sort of, I guess, not everything can end perfectly in this world. Mordecai is elevated, but this is how chapter 10 begins. King Xerxes imposed tribute, tax, throughout the empire to its distant shores. Everything comes at a price. One wonders, that there have been all kinds of speculation as to why would this occasion a new tax. Well, he lost a good number of people, perhaps some of his soldiers, so he needs to recruit and train more. That's part of it. Or he's just using this as an opportunity to, enhance his own greed. We kind of know that about him already, that he's a bit of an opportunist, and, everybody's happy, so let's try to use this moment to sneak in a tax increase. Not really sure. But anyway, like I say, not everything. This is not a perfect world, so the government will take advantage wherever they can. And all his acts of power and his mighty deed together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king had raised him. These are all written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. And so he comes out at the end of the story as, kind of the hero, if you will, alongside Esther for the work that God has done in their lives. All right. We'll take a real quick stop for questions here, see if any's been churned up from out in the fields. Here we go. All right, good comment here. Seeing, I'm guessing this relates back to talking about God's care in our time, in His providence, and the times of exile. The comment is made here: we pray to God to deliver us from evil, but should not necessarily expect the evil to be removed, but rather that we're to look up to the cross of Christ. The reference here is to what happened to the Israelites when they were in the wilderness and the snakes come among them. The snakes are never actually taken away, but they're given something to focus on. It's a similar sort of thing here. That first edict was never taken away. but yet they were given something new. Yeah, good thought. Yeah, absolutely. And then the comment here at the end, the Jews celebrated Purim as a deliverance from death, but they were still in exile. Yeah, the technical exile had ended. They were allowed to go home, but these were the people who continued to stay behind and live in the empire in the disjointed world. Yeah, very good. Absolutely. Any comments from the floor? Marjorie.
In the Mennonite church that I grew up in, not in my time, but in my parents' and grandparents' time, when they wanted to select a minister, they had about, I understand it, 3 candidates at the end that they were choosing between. And it was something, I'm not sure of the details, but something to do with slips of paper in a Bible or a book. And then the Bibles would be laid out and the 3 men would come up and choose one. And I think it was, the longest slip of paper or whatever was the choice for that minister.
Yeah, just for those who might not have been able to hear that, just how in the Mennonite church, where Marjorie grew up in her parents' time, pastors were selected, names of the pastors were put into a Bible, and kind of a drawing of lots, if you will, and people would come up, the name would be selected, Totally, there's all kinds of ways these things get done. All right. One email I received yesterday reminded us that if you're wanting to actually watch the story of Esther, we have a video of it in our library. It's called One Night with the King. And I think that's available on some of the other streaming services as well. One Night with the King. And it's the story of Esther, if you want to kind of see it presented in a visual sort of a way. All right, we have a few minutes left, and we never end Bible class early. So I get my chance here to unload something else. The ongoing feast. One of the things that we've been highlighting as we go through this is ways that the book of Esther is, even though it doesn't mention God, even though there's God is not kind of right out there and active all through the story, there is in Esther a kind of a mini version, if you will, of one of the important themes of the Bible. We'll pick up the theme of feasting. If you open up your Bible at the very beginning, Genesis chapter 3, the whole world is thrown into chaos at a feast. Not a great royal feast, but a feast occasioned by the serpent as Adam and Eve are tempted and then succumb to that temptation to eat the fruit. And I like both these depictions of it, because on one hand you can see, as one would expect in paradise, the table was full. There was abundant fruit, and they chose and they ate. And then I really like this picture, just because it shows the immediate aftermath of that, in the sense that autumn comes, death comes, the leaves change color, and it also answered one of my questions as to where this all might have happened in the world. It appears that it could have happened right here in Canada, because those are maple leaves right there. We've always known this was God's country, right? Yeah, there you go. And then if you were to page through all the way to the book of Revelation, how does Revelation end? Well, Revelation chapter 19, verse 9 isn't quite the end, but we're pretty much there. The marriage supper of the Lamb in his kingdom, which has no end. Sort of like Esther. Begins with a feast, ends with a feast. And along the way, we're given the foretaste of the feast to come. The feast we know in the church as the Lord's Supper. And one of the passages that I particularly have been drawn to over the years is the story of Jesus and the two disciples on Easter evening as they're journeying along together. I don't have time to read this, but Jesus, as you know, comes up behind with these two guys as they're walking, and he joins into the conversation, and one of them named Cleopas, when Jesus seems a bit out of touch about what's happened, he says, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And with that, he goes on to talk about Jesus and how Jesus, was the prophet, mighty in word and deed, and they'd hoped he was the one to redeem Israel, but now he's died, and this is the third day. And then Jesus says to them, "O foolish one, slow of heart to believe," and he begins to feed them, first with his word, feeds them as they journey along, beginning with Moses and the prophets. He interprets all the scriptures concerning himself, and so he begins to feed them, and then they come to the inn, and they want Jesus to stay with them, for it's toward evening and the day is far spent, and so he goes in with them, and then while he's at the table with them, he took the bread, blessed it, broke it, gave it to them, and their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And I think this has so many neat parallels even to Esther. Here comes Jesus. They don't even know who he is. There he is walking along beside them. They're pouring out their hearts. He's teaching them about the scriptures, and they're having this conversation. They don't even know who they're with. And they want him to stay. Come on in, let's go into the inn, let's have a meal together. And as they're doing this, he breaks the bread. Now, some people get hung up on, were they having the Lord's Supper and that sort of thing. That's a kind of a side issue. What really happens is they see at the table, as he breaks the bread with them, they recognize him. And that really, I think, teaches us, too, about what we experience at the Lord's table, too, the feast on the way. That even as we gather at his table in the midst of all of the uncertainties of life, there in the breaking of the bread, there at his table, we see him. There he comes to you and to me. And with that, dear friends, we are pretty much out of time, and we have a bit of reorganizing we need to do before we get ready for our service today. So thank you for all your comments and questions and other things that you have said along the way. It's been a delight to teach this class, and hopefully in the fall we're a little more resembling normal, and we're able to have lots of people in here, as well as perhaps some people joining us online. Let's close with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the providential care that you show for us all the time. And as we journey through times of exile, times when things are out of order, as your children did long ago, you're there beside them and with us as well. We thank you, too, that you have undone the evil that was done in the garden as people feasted in the wrong way. And you have set before us a table, a banquet that will never end. And even now, you feed us until we are with you. Bless us now and prepare our hearts to worship, that we may be open to hear your word, be strengthened by that word, and grow in our faith. In Jesus' name, amen.